Well, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Maybe just take a moment to settle into the body. Maybe see what sort of tension you've brought with you from the day. Perhaps seeing if there's anything that can be released, let go of. You might take a couple of deep breaths. Just letting yourself relax on the out breath. You might start to notice the sensations of the breath. Feeling the in-breath. The out-breath. You might let attention shift to whatever part of the breath is most prominent. Perhaps it's the sensations of the nostrils, or the feeling of the abdomen moving in and out. Just letting attention rest there, very gently. Attention doesn't need to do anything. Breath arises and passes away on its own. All attention does is notice. if it feels good to you, you can continue on just noticing. Or if you're feeling that the mind is having a hard time settling, you might try a little tool to help. Sometimes it's helpful to add some counting. Just count the breath on the in-breath. Count the breath on the out-breath. You might start counting from 8 and work your way backwards to 1. You might continue to do that until you can feel okay in letting that go. It's just a helpful little tool to help the mind generate some concentration. It's completely optional. When the mind comes back from being lost in thought, just very gently returning attention to the sensations of the breath. Letting this flow of phenomena arise and pass away on its own. If you'd like, you can keep the flow of phenomena that comprise the breath in attention. And you can let your mind open wide to receive everything in experience. Sight, sounds, thoughts, mental phenomena. And all of that come and go in the background while maintaining attention on the breath. And continuing to keep the flow of sensations, that is the breath, in the foreground of attention, and the flow of all other phenomena in the background. You might take a moment to notice that everything is in flux. Everything comes and goes. The sensations of the body come and go and change. Sights and sounds come and go. Attention and awareness shift. Thoughts appear and disappear. Nothing stays the same. Everything has changed. And in the context of this sea of changing phenomena, you might ask yourself, what is breathing this breath? Is it some bodily sensation that's changing and going away? It's some thought, some concept that appears and disappears. It's some image that you have that arises and passes away too. If everything in experience changes, what are you? in this sea of phenomena that's always changing, where nothing is ever stable or static. This sea of phenomena, that's all you ever experience. Who is meditating? What part of that experience is you? Overcoming. I appreciate you all taking time out of your evenings to be here, to share the Dhamma together. It's good to see you all. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been exploring the 3 characteristics of existence. And tonight we're going to finish up that series of talks. We're going to talk about Anatta. But I wanted to give a caveat before I did. Anatta is probably one of the most difficult concepts in Buddhism. So if everything I say is not completely and immediately clear, I would chalk that up to like my miscommunication or my inability to communicate that rather than your like anything about your understanding. So it's perfectly okay not to fully get all of this. So if we want to understand Anatta, there's a sutta that's, I think, kind of instructive, maybe a way to frame things. It's the Ananda Sutta. So Ananda was the Buddha's cousin and kind of faithful attendant for some number of decades. And in the sutta, Vacchagotta, the wanderer, he comes to see the Buddha, and he comes up to the Buddha and sits down beside the Buddha, and he says, Master Gotama, is there a self that persists after death? And the Buddha just sits there. He doesn't say anything. So Vacchagotta, he waits, and then he asks a second question. He says, Master Gotama, is there not a self that persists past death? And again, the Buddha says nothing. Then Vacchagotta gets up and leaves. The sutta doesn't explain what Vacchagotta was feeling, but if I were in his shoes, I would feel pretty confused, I would think. The sutta continues on. Ananda had overheard this exchange, and he comes up to the Buddha and he asks, why did you not answer Vacchagotta's questions? And the Buddha says, well, if I had told him that there was a self that persists after death, he would get the wrong impression. He would think there's some kind of soul that, some kind of like permanent soul that persists from person to person, which is wrong. And if I had told him there was not a self that persists after death, he would get the wrong impression from that too and think there was nothing. He continues on to say that there was no way that I could answer that question that would lead him to a right understanding of Anatta. The right understanding of Anatta is basically that nothing in experience is you. So there's no categorization of anything that arises as either you or not you. That's the kind of correct understanding of the world. And so that's really maybe how to understand Anatta. Nothing in experience can be a source of a stable, permanent sense of self. So for those of you who were here for the last couple of weeks when we talked about impermanence and dukkha, Anatta kind of follows naturally from those two things. So impermanence is the idea that everything in experience comes and goes. Everything that arises passes away. And dukkha is the idea that because everything is impermanent, nothing that you grasp at in the world of experience can provide lasting happiness. Because that thing itself will cease to exist, and the happiness that comes from that thing will also cease to exist. And so Anatta kind of follows naturally from that. Because things are impermanent and not a source of lasting happiness, nothing in experience can provide a stable, permanent sense of self. Excuse me. So I think it's helpful to speak about how we misunderstand Anatta, because we certainly don't live from that perspective most of the time. We live from the perspective of a separate, permanent self. And basically, the way I like to think of this kind of separate self is it's a separation. It's some way of dividing up existence or experience such that part of experience is me and part of experience is not me. And there's like many different like angles or axes you can do that on. So we often misunderstand ourselves as the body. There's a kind of felt sense of it being something to be this body as opposed to like being this glass. There's a kind of felt difference in that. We often understand ourselves as our thoughts, as our like stream of concepts and imagining that's going on in the mind. That's a big one. Sometimes we understand ourselves as kind of like one step removed from that. Like there's some little person inside your head that's the pilot of your body, or the thinker of your thoughts, or the doer of your actions. In terms of concepts, we understand ourselves to be our identities. We understand ourselves to be like a mother or father, a sister or brother, this particular profession. We understand ourselves as our different characteristics. We understand ourselves as maybe smart or kind, or not thinking of any other characteristics at this moment, but other characteristics. We think of ourselves in terms of our likes and dislikes. I like this food or this object. I like people to relate to me this way. I like these kind of feelings. I don't like these. So that's kind of how we understand the sense of self, as this like agglomeration of all these different beliefs about the world, really about how the world should be and like how we are. I think of that as like akin to when you wear like sunglasses or tinted glasses or something, like the world becomes dark, or if your tinted glasses are blue, the world becomes blue. I think of it like we go around the world wearing these self-colored glasses, right? We see all of this experience that arises in terms of all these beliefs we have about ourselves. We see them as kind of constraints on our happiness. We see them as the world needing to be a certain way. If we are somebody who likes this thing, we can be happy if we have this certain thing, but if we don't, we might not be happy. If we understand ourselves as playing a particular role or identity, we might be happy if we feel like we're fulfilling those. But if we don't, we might not be happy. So you can think about the self as being a kind of constraint on our ability to be happy too. I saw a YouTube video one time of a hypnotist, and he had gotten this woman out of the audience, and he pulled her up on stage, and he hypnotized her, and he asked her to hold out her arm like this to the side, and she did, and he started he had this whole kind of spiel about how her arm was as strong as an oak tree, and it was like an iron bar, and it couldn't be moved, and he would like kind of push down on her arm, and she would resist and wouldn't let him move it. And so he went through this whole spiel, and he stops, and he gets in front of her, and he says, "Okay, now try and move your arm." She's like holding her arm out like this, and you see her arm kind of wiggle a little bit, and you see this look of just like shock and surprise come up on her face. She's clearly trying to move her arm and can't. And the only thing stopping her is her belief in what her arm should be doing. He's not holding on to her or anything. It's just how she sees the world, how she sees the world should be. And this is precisely what we do with our beliefs about the self. We have like all of these like many beliefs about how the world should be, and we make the world in that way. We conform to our expectations, and when our expectations are not met, we become unhappy. But those beliefs, even the ones that are very strongly felt and very powerful, they are ultimately just as empty as that woman's belief about her arm. They're just kind of constructs of the mind, and they can be set aside. There's another analogy I have about how this kind of sense of self works. It's the analogy of an actor. So just to kind of use a movie as a reference, the last big movie I heard about was the Barbie movie. And so the main character is named Barbie, and I think the actress is Margot Robbie. And so Margot Robbie, being a human being, has this full and rich life, like we all do. But when she goes on set and films as Barbie, she constrains herself to act in the way that Barbie acts. And this Barbie is a much more limited character, and the perspective is much smaller. But it's just this set of artificial constraints, like beliefs in the mind. And when Margot Robbie gets done filming and goes home, she sheds those constraints and becomes this, or doesn't become, she acts from the perspective of this larger, greater being. And that's what can happen to us through practice. When these constraints go away, when these beliefs about who we are and how the world should be go away, then we can see from the perspective of our true nature, which is a much larger and greater thing. This is a perspective that's already there. It's not something you have to find or learn about. It's something that you were born with. It's something that's actually operating right now. It's just kind of been papered over by this kind of construct of self that we've created. But it's there and it's available to us. And when we see anatta clearly, when we start to drop these beliefs that we have about ourselves, there is this untethering that happens. So when you're seeing from the perspective of a small, separate self, you understand yourself to be kind of constrained in space, to this body, constrained in time, to this, 80 years or whatever we have on this planet. But when that goes away, the barrier between this body and the world and this mind and the world, it goes away too, and it leaves space for the mind to understand itself as something different. So it can start to see the interdependent nature of reality. It can start to see that, this body that seems very solid, well, all of those bodily sensations, those are all interactions with the world. It's, I'm feeling my legs on the chair right now, which is an interaction between my body and the chair. And I'm breathing in and breathing out right now, which is an interaction between my body and the air. And everything about the body is that way. And when you understand it that way, there's no real solid distinction between the body and the world. And the same is true of the mind too. All the thoughts we have are conditioned by other people and other beings and in the environment in general. And there's no bright line between where this mind starts and this mind starts too. It's all one. When there's no barrier, the mind can understand itself as everything, everything through all of space and time. All phenomena that arise and pass away can be understood as ourselves. And when that happens, that is a profound revelation, to understand oneself as unity, awareness, and everything that arises in awareness. I spoke last week about how we spend most of our life, or generally spend all of our lives, searching for a source of lasting satisfaction by kind of grasping at the world of experience. And we made the point that this is never going to work. Everything in experience is impermanent, and so can't provide you any source of lasting satisfaction. But this revelation, this change in perspective from being a separate small self to being all things, to being awareness and everything that arises in awareness, that perspective can provide that source of stability and source of happiness that we're all spending our lives looking for. And I have an analogy that I hope can illustrate this. This is also a movie analogy, but a little bit different one. So imagine you are at the movies. So I guess nowadays most movies are are shown by digital projectors, but imagine there's an analog projector. That's what they use when I was a kid. Analog projectors, if you don't know, store the film on this like big kind of hubcap looking thing. It's a big like reel of film, and the film passes in front of a bright light that projects the content on the film onto the screen. So that's the scenario to imagine. In this analogy, the way that we normally live our lives is like the movie from the perspective of the actors on the screen. So from the perspective of the actors, life is impermanent. Everything is changing. Stuff is happening on the screen, and there's cuts to different scenes, and there's stories and drama and all sorts of stuff going on, just like in our lives. Everything is changing, and we live in our stories, and there's drama and change, and there's no source of lasting satisfaction. But when one shifts one's perspective to not just being the actors on the screen, or just not just being the kind of projection on the screen, but being like the actors in the screen in the movie projector, there's something really interesting that happens. Because if you look at things from the point of view of the film, like the reel of film, nothing is changing. So that film is already there. That film is already like set and made. It's not, nothing about it changes, even though it's playing, and the experience on the screen is playing. And that's analogous to what happens when we understand ourselves as everything, as all of space and time, all the phenomena that arise and pass away. Because I'm having trouble explaining this, but when you understand yourself as everything, that never changes. That makes sense. But it's that, and so that's a good way to see experience, like this kind of sea of impermanence that I was trying to get at in the meditation is a projection of nibbana into awareness. So someone who's enlightened and has seen this, has this understanding is like fully fledged, their experience is still just as impermanent as ours is, but they have a different perspective because it's coming from this place of stability and essentially permanence. Sorry, I said the word place, which I should not have said. It's perspective, because it's coming from this perspective of permanence and stability. That can be our source of lasting happiness. That can be our reason to let go of our cravings. And so if you can live from this place from this perspective of experience, your suffering goes too. We know from the Four Noble Truths that dukkha, suffering, is conditioned by craving, and this point of seeing, it doesn't, like the stories that we tell ourselves don't motivate from that point of view. What does the entire universe care about this body getting a new iPhone to play with. It just doesn't. It's not something motivating. That perspective only moves in one direction. It only moves in the direction of love and kindness and unity and wholeness. This story to share that maybe we'll kind of get this across. I have two nephews, and I go up to see them with some regularity. And I remember a time, it's about a year ago, when I went up to go see them, and we were playing together, like the two of them and me and my sister and my brother-in-law were playing together in the basement. And we were playing a game that my older nephew wanted to play, which was Catch the Monsters. And the way Catch the Monsters is played is this very complicated story that I didn't understand then and I don't understand now. But basically, like, everybody had a particular role they had to play. So like somebody had to be the monster and hide in the corner, and somebody else had to like set a particular trap for the monster, and third person had to like kind of like scare the monster into the trap. And it was this whole kind of thing. And my nephew was very attached to the story. When somebody would do something that was outside of what he understood the game to be, he would get upset. This happened reasonably often. But me, I never got upset when the story didn't go as planned, because I wasn't attached to the idea that the monsters needed to get caught or whatever. I was just happy playing with my nephew. And so this is kind of the change in perspective that comes to our stories. When we're locked into this separate self, we have these stories that can sometimes pull very strongly, and we get attached to, and we in our happiness is kind of predicated on these stories playing out the way that we want. But when you shift to this larger perspective, it's not so much that it doesn't care which story is being played, but it's just happy playing the game or playing the story, kind of regardless of what gets played. And there's no suffering in that. So this is where Anatta leads us. This is where practice leads us to this larger perspective, this idea that we're not separate, permanent individuals. Practice leads us this way because when we see the world from this perspective, we don't suffer. And it's okay if this seems like divorced from your lived experience. It's we really feel this perspective of the separate self very strongly. We really live it and we really feel it. So it's okay if you can't kind of immediately live from this larger perspective, but it is something that's available to you, even if your sense of self is blocking it at the moment. And I would suggest that if you look, you might be able to find it. Certainly not all the time, but you might see it peeking through in some of your behaviors, especially when your heart opens. To me, when your heart opens, that's really that larger perspective talking. It's that voice from unity, from wholeness. It's speaking. Yeah, it's that perspective is always there. It's always kind of waiting to shine through. Yeah, that's what I have for you all today.